Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of Women Serve 2. Today we have Emily Foreman with us. She joined the United States Air Force in 2016 as a 13N Intercontinental Ballistic Missile Launch Officer. She is currently in school pursuing a master's degree in supply chain management. During her time in F.E. Warren Air Force Base, she served as the Women's Initiative team lead for 20th Air Force within the 90th Missile Wing. In this role, she contributed to initiatives aimed at improving quality of life and operational flexibility for service members, including developing flexible operation schedules for parents, streamlining the review process for breast pumps to be used in secure facilities, and collaborating with squadrons to ensure missile operatives have access to gender appropriate equipment. So, Emily, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
First off, Ballistic Missile Launch Officer,
Yeah.
tell us kind of your military journey, why you joined, why you chose that career field, and just kind of take us through essentially that whole journey.
Yeah. So when I was in college, I actually did a year of ROTC. It was the same year that Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed. And so they weren't commissioning anybody and I missed out on scholarships. Long story short, I didn't know if I could pay the college next year. And I thought I wanted to change my degree. So I left ROTC and graduated, got married, didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. And where I was going for work was right next to a MEP station. And I just saw the military people there. And I was like, you know what? That's a better direction than whatever I'm doing right now. And so then I ended up doing OTS. It didn't even occur to me at the time that OTS is that much harder to get in through than other options. So, like, I didn't learn that till much later. So the fact that I got in that way, it's a bit of a gamble versus leaving ROTC, right? Went through OTS in September 2016. So very nearly 2017 actually. And when I joined, I really just wanted to do something important. I was working for Walgreens previously, and it just struck me how they wanted you to feel so earnest and indebted to that company, but it wasn't worth it. There was no value in being loyal to them as a worker. And I thought, I really actually do want to feel like I belong to something important. And I don't mind terrible work schedules. I just want it to be worth something and be for something that is worth that hard work. And so I just wanted to be an officer, and they put me in through for 13N missile operations officer. And of course, missile officers, the career has had a lot of bad rap over the years. I mean, you just have to look in a quick Google search and you'll see all the news headlines. And there's still a lot of stuff that we're always working through culturally, but it really isn't as bad as like the original news stories you might find. And so it actually has been really interesting being in this career and trying to find my place in it as a woman, as a mom. And I actually find the nuclear mission really interesting and is something even like, when I grow up and I'm not doing military anymore, I think I want to keep doing working with this from the civilian side as well. That's the biggest thing. And then also my short funny story of it is I joined the Air Force to travel the world and I got stationed 6 years next to my sister because my sister is stationed in Cheyenne, or sorry, my sister, a civilian, lives in Cheyenne. I was stationed there. And so I had the added benefit of when my children were born, my sister was right there to help me with them. She's like 15 years older than me. So her children are teenagers, built in babysitter. It was all fantastic. Highly recommend it. Um,
I will say that definitely does help, like, especially
yeah,
being like a military family, like having someone close to you. So you're
absolutely.
not relying on the CDC or people who want to charge $40 an hour for 4 kids. And I'm like,
Yeah.
no.
Well, when I had my second, everyone you worry about when you're in the hospital, what are you gonna do with your first kid? Who's gonna watch them, right? Are you gonna have family come? But it's like the fact that my sister was there and Emmett wasn't phased at all. She picked him up from daycare and he was just excited and thought it was a cool deal that he got to stay at his aunt's house. So, oh, sorry. I keep hitting my computer. Anyway, yeah, it was very beneficial to live so close to family. It's like I honestly don't know how I would have managed without her having that close proximity.
Yeah, so while you were at Warren, because I know you're at a different base right now, but you were at
Mhm.
Warren, you were, involved with the Women's Initiative team. First off, why did you want to be proactive in that group? And what were some of the things that you worked on?
So that can be a little contentious actually, in that when I had my first kid, it was in COVID times. And so he was born in 2020, and our career field was going through some huge changes at that time with scheduling and how they manage personnel. Like, so for example, to know a little bit more about our mission, we have nuclear missile silos that are all across the United States, central US. And so for my particular area, we would drive as far out as like a couple hours into Nebraska, or Colorado, some in Wyoming. And we would go to these facilities that are remote and connected to the launch facilities and the missiles. We'd monitor the computers for any status. If the missile had any errors, if maintenance is being run, just, general day to day, what you can imagine maintaining a weapon system. Also, inevitably, if the president authorizes a nuclear launch, the nuclear missile officers are the ones who process that launch. And everyone says pushing a button, but it's actually turning a key. And so it's you and your crew partner all by yourselves for 24 hours in this facility underground, about 60 feet underground. And so, yeah, it's interesting. And, being pregnant and doing that was fascinating. You hope desperately that the elevator downstairs doesn't break so that you get stuck and have to climb the ladder with your big, like, pregnant belly. I know I had someone who had to do that, and I was just like, how did you survive? Yeah,
Yeah,
but
no.
yeah, there's just so much to unpack with it. And at the time, we were doing 24 hours out at the facility, and then we drive home and we'd have a day, like a rest day afterwards. And it was maybe about like a 3-day cycle where every 3 days you'd be going out to a new facility. Well, during COVID, they didn't know what to do with us as far as like, how do we make sure people don't get sick? Because if people get sick, then we aren't going to have as many people as we need to like maintain this mission. So they're like, okay, we're just going to send all the crews we need out there and they're going to stay at the facility for 2 weeks straight. I know. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, it was interesting. That changed so many things. And I just had found out I was pregnant, and that was really hard. Luckily, by the time I had my child and then started going out to the field again, they had brought it down to only 1 week out at the facility, not two. That was easier to manage. However, if you can imagine the difficulty, my baby was 3 months old, and I was going out into the field for a week at a time, and I was maintaining my breast supply, my milk supply then. So I would breastfeed when I was home for a week, but then the next week I would pump for the entire time. So I've actually had an interesting dual experience of exclusive breastfeeding, but also exclusive pumping. And just seeing, because like I think a lot of moms, it's one or the other. They don't really get to do both, where it's like you're doing multiple days at a time, relying only on a breast pump. Usually at some point in the day, you have the baby here there to like kind of help boost your supply. That was really difficult in that naturally your milk supply decreases over the week. You can try to do a schedule that keeps it going, but it's really impossible when you're doing shift work. You're so sleep deprived. Yeah. And so then you also have like the mental anguish of watching your blood supply, your milk supply get less and less throughout the week. And when you're a mom, it's super hard not to have your self-worth tied up in how much milk you're able to produce.
And I know a lot of women struggle with that.
Yeah, it's really difficult. Like even when like kids over a year old, um, I'd randomly get it pop in my head like I should increase my milk supply. It's just like no, stop it. We're past this. But
So was it hard to get your pump through that security? Because I know you're working in a skiff and they're very strict on what goes in and what
Mhm,
goes out. Like working as intel, like you couldn't bring a backpack in. It had to be a clear bag.
mhm.
It's very it's very restricted. So did you
So
have any issues with that?
it's even more restricted in that facility because they're not only worried about, security of recording devices or anything like that, but they're also worried about the electrical capacity of whatever device you have and whether or not it can interfere with the device, any like the equipment around you. Because, in these facilities, there's, of course, the computers that help communicate with the missiles, but there's also lots of redundant comm systems and just survivability equipment that is meant to keep you going in case there's a nuclear detonation or anything like that. And so there actually is this list of breast pumps, or like lists of electronic devices in general, that we have to reference, and these are devices that have been approved. And when I looked up the breast pumps, at the time, for me, there was only one breast pump that was still in the market that was on that list. And I was looked at that and thought, that's a bad thing. Like, this is outdated. This says it can't be used within 6 feet of your computer. That's a problem. I know. You just looked at all these like, okay. So right as I was like having a lot of struggle and like figuring out my schedule with my leadership and trying to balance being a mom, being away as a mom so frequently, and also trying to progress my career, there was a few other women at the other bases, because there's 3 missile bases, that were also having similar struggles. And so one particular woman, she ended up going to our 20th Air Force commander at the time, General Letton, and explaining to him some of the struggles that we'd been working on. And so then he enacted the 20th Women's Initiative team. And I was already aware of all those things, that because we've been talking amongst each other, trying to figure out how to solve these problems. And so when the call was out for finding a representative for the wing, I was like, me, obviously, like,
Yeah.
I already know what this is. Now, of course, when you read the lead-in, the Women's Initiative team, it's a tongue twister, unfortunately. But when you say WIT, everyone thinks weapons inspection.
Yeah, that's fair, especially like in your career field.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's always really funny trying to explain the context of that, because it doesn't really roll off the tongue to say Women's Initiative team.
So
Yeah.
you're struggling with like, because I know you mentioned like you're a new mom and you're trying to figure out being gone for a while, coming back. How did you prioritize, or your suggestions on how do you prioritize family and military?
It's so hard. So just to give you perspective of how often I was gone, even with the caregiver leave, granted, it was the old system where we only had 12 weeks, but um, by the time my son was a year old, I was gone for a third of his life already. And it was a real struggle seeing the regulations that said things like, you can't deploy or no TDYs, and just trying to understand, like, what is the intent behind these regulations saying that they prioritize women being with their children? And yet, what my mission was, that wasn't covered under either of those circumstances. And so, just really grappling with, how do I emotionally feel part of this mission when I also am trying to understand myself as a new mom? I still didn't figure it out with my first, and even with my second, I struggled really hard. But I think overall, the best thing you gotta do is really prioritize yourself. It's really easy to get focused and say, I gotta do all these things for my children, I gotta do all these things for my work. But if you really prioritize yourself first, it's a lot easier than to balance the other two. And by prioritizing myself, that can be things like, personal development, anything that makes you feel like you're productive for what you want to do, right? Like a podcast that you might listen to in the morning. I have one that I like listening to called Before Breakfast, and it can be a lot of really, admittedly silly tips on how to be more productive of your time. But I actually really like it because it's really great for being mindful and thinking, how can I improve my environment around me, and making me feel like I have a sense of control over my time when it feels so like filled up, right? How do I balance and figure out time to exercise and eat well and all of that? Because like, if you're just focusing on your children eating well and not yourself, first of all, it's hypocritical. Yeah, so I mean, I think that's the biggest thing. Like, what I've seen out of my family and my mom when I was growing up is like moms self-sacrificing too much. I want my children to understand that my well-being is a priority.
And I think like modeling that is so important too,
Mhm,
because child obesity has gone up significantly, and you
mhm,
really can't blame anyone besides the parents. As parents, we have to model like healthy, healthy eating habits, exercising,
mhm,
because if they see that, they're going to be more willing and more, think of it as more acceptable to do as they grow up.
mhm.
And
But
I think
also giving yourself free time to do things you enjoy, setting boundaries. right?
Yeah, and that's like such a huge thing too. But then it goes into mom guilt. And because you mentioned that you were gone for a third of your kid's life for the first year, how did you overcome that mom guilt?
So what really helped me with that was seeing some of the positives that can come out of it. My husband, fantastic father, stay-at-home dad with both the kids, and he was badass. I went and out in the field and I pumped for a week, and it was just him and my son, and they have such a strong bond from that, right? And it actually ended up being beneficial because then when I got pregnant with my second, it wasn't so hard he like how do I say it? It wasn't so hard to phase myself out of my being in my regular aspect of my son's life. I could easily go take a nap or like when he was born, I didn't have any of the issues with jealousy. It could be that he's a boy. Like my daughter, she's so clingy. So completely different aspect with her. But
Every
yeah, it
kid
was
is different.
yeah, every kid's different, but I felt like it was actually very beneficial to have him understand dad is his primary parent because it actually did make it easier to balance between work and family. Yeah.
That's good. Because I know, like, that's something, like, even to this day, I struggle with, right? Like, mom guilt. Like, I'm trying to do my own thing, but then time is something that you can't get back. And it's so hard. And it goes so fast, too, right? Like, I
Hmm.
remember my daughter is also another COVID baby. And I can't believe that was 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah,
And it
it's
goes by so
crazy.
fast, but I think you're right, and you hit it spot on where you have to prioritize and you kind of have to almost kind of separate because you can't pour from an empty cup, right? So for
But
people
and it's
who
interesting you mentioned mom guilt because if there's anywhere where I do feel mom guilt, it's that usually if it's the mom taking care of the kids, there's a lot of resources that moms have for each other. It's easier to do the moms groups and, develop friend networks. And if there's anywhere I feel a little bit guilty, my husband doesn't have as easy access to that. And so it's actually in our new area harder for my son to make friends with being stay at home and not being in school or anything like that. And that's where I feel guilt, if anything, is I know that if I were the one to take care of him, that it's be a matter I could address easily. But it's not. It's just simply not how we have it set up.
yeah, and it is hard because I do know there are some couples that the wife is the military and the husband is either the stay at home or the civilian, and it's taboo. So a lot of women, not saying that they're not welcoming, but you don't see them reaching out as much to those male counterparts
Hmm. Yeah.
because of that situation.
Yeah.
So like for people who are in because you were in about what, 4 years when you had your first one? Like, for people who are in and thinking about having kids, but want to focus on the career, do you think they should wait to have children until like they feel steady in their career or while in the military?
So I think about this a lot because I think back on a smart career move. I should have waited. However, as I mentioned to you, I didn't go out of ROTC like immediately out of college, and so I was actually already older than my peers when I was going through the entire process. And then also like I was already like a year or two older than everybody, and I had to wait a year and a half at my tech school before I could complete it because security clearances were taking longer at the time. So I was already like super slow going through the process, maybe like 3 years older than a lot of my peers, right? That put me at closer to like 28, 29 when I was thinking, man, I really need to think about when I'm having children. And so, whereas everybody else around me was maybe 24, 25, right? They had time on them. And so, on one hand, it would have been better, but on the other hand, I did make that decision off of a lot of other variables that, are probably still important. Like, you could say hindsight 2020, or was that important? Yeah, like kind of, because, it doesn't get any easier as you get older.
Very true.
And you don't know if you're gonna struggle with infertility. I have plenty of friends who've had. And so you could say that that's the hard thing about starting a family. You could say that I'm gonna start and then be pregnant in a month, or it could take a decade. And I've seen people struggle with both, you know? And so like as far as like I've had other people in my career on alert. I'd talk to them and about their fertility issues that they were actively struggling with. And can you imagine like trying to do that and shift work and you're gone for a week at a time? Like, how do you have time to like plan everything right?
And
And
ovulation is a very specific window too.
yes, exactly. And that's what I mean. Like, so, God forbid anyone wanted to be a parent at all in our career. Um, Not to say, like, on the flip side, I would say our career is probably better than most to be a parent. There's a lot more flexibility. Like, honestly, the people that had to partner with on my cruise, the ones who are most well-rounded were all the priories who've had experience doing other terrible jobs where they deployed so much. And they were like, this is a break compared to what I've done elsewhere. So I feel like the people who complained the most were the ones with the least amount of like full knowledge of what the Air Force is, right?
Yeah, that exposure.
Exactly. The exposure really helps. And so, I mean, I'm kind of going on a tangent at this point. I'm sorry. But yeah, it's like if your priority is your career and you have time, it's okay to wait. However, there's always a reason not to have children. You're always going to have a reason. I mean, I saw someone who her kid, there was a 12-year difference between her first and second kid, and they did not intend for that. Between deployments and doing training and joining OTS and all of that, that's just what ended up happening. They wouldn't have chosen that for themselves. And so there are like no kidding things that are going to make it really hard to do that. But you know what? In the long run, I think I'm going to prioritize and feel more satisfied about my children than what military has to provide me. So,
Yeah, I think you hit on like so many big points, right? When my husband and I were trying to have kids, I was still active duty and my stress level was through the roof. Like we were doing shift work, our schedules barely matched up, and it took a very long time for us to get pregnant. And we actually went to the clinic and they were like, well, how long have you been trying? And we said it was a year because I knew that's what the clinic referred
the
to
one to take
before.
care.
So if you are trying or if you are struggling, just keep in mind the clinic's not going to refer you out or do additional testing unless you've tried for a year. But then I got out and then I immediately got pregnant. But
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then
right, like that's just
also I think a lot of people don't realize too, like they go to an OBG when they have issues with reproductive health and stuff, but actually it's a reproductive endocrinologist that you should see if you're having fertility issues. And it might take like I had one friend who was going to OBGs for a decade before she realized she should have gone to an RE. And then all of a sudden they were able to make headway in figuring out what would work for them. It's so hard and convoluted and hard to know what to do.
And it's just like, yes, you may want to focus on your career now, but if family is a priority, these are certain things that you do need to think about because it isn't like you could get pregnant next week if you wanted to. I have a friend, her and her husband are dual mill, and they're thinking about baby number 3. And it has been so hard for her to get pregnant because of the job. And then he got picked up for residency. And then she was like, well, we're going to stop trying for this month because I don't want to be super pregnant when we move. And I don't want to be a single parent
It
or acting
happened,
like a
didn't
single
it?
parent. No, it hasn't yet. But
Still hasn't. Okay.
no, it
I was half
hasn't. But
expecting you to tell me, and then she got
no,
pregnant.
no. And she's still having issues. But then she's getting to the age where I told her, I was like, girl, you're about to be a geriatric age. And that becomes a
Which
whole.
let's be clear here. It's unfair to say 35 is
Yeah, I know
geriatric.
yeah, but I'm just using medical terms.
Sure.
But yeah, and it's ridiculous that 35 is considered geriatric, but it does increase the risk of certain birth defects. And I told her, I was like, I know you want to wait, but you got to figure out, like, are you going to be okay with not having baby number 3? Or are you going to be okay with those possible health risks?
Yeah.
So I think when people do want to prioritize military and family, like think about what you truly want. She has a friend that is a doctor and she's like, oh, I don't want kids. I completely prioritize my career. And that's her prerogative. Like that was what she knew from the get-go joining into the military was that she was going to be a military doctor. But my friend, she was like, but I want to have kids. Like kids are like my legacy, right? Like, on my deathbed, the military is not going to care. Like who's going
Yeah.
to be truly with me when I'm older?
Hmm.
And so, when you are prioritizing those things, I do think you have to consider those other what ifs.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of where we're at with like so for example, my major board is coming up this month and I'm not very optimistic with it. I have our career field, excuse me. My field has a lower threshold for promotion. It's maybe about 80% compared to say pilots. And I have to compare because we are considered operators and we do have our own avenue like we're compared against each other for promotion boards, so we don't have to worry about competing with everybody else anymore. All of that to say that talking to my leadership, they told me, like, look, we don't know how well you'll do on this board, but if you really hit the ground running, then you might be able to make it for your second round. And I was like, that's great and all. And I would like to put my all in what I can, but I am not sacrificing my family. And I will do what I can up to the point of I'm not going crazy for this. It's not that worth it.
So, you're kind of talking about like the major boards. And I know, especially when it comes to like military and family, a lot of the women are the ones that get out because the military doesn't necessarily prioritize the family life that they proclaim. But why do you think it matters that women take up that space in military service?
Diversity is always really huge, right? And I know that that is like probably a catchphrase everyone's tired of hearing by now. Genuinely, if you want a diverse environment, you need to make sure women are included in on that. Also, if you want to be able to say something along the lines of, how do we get more Gen Z or Gen Alpha or whatever generations come in after that? How do we make sure we maintain our incoming military personnel? Then how do we get women to join as well is also part of that same question. Because I mean, for one, actually, I looked up the statistic yesterday because I was curious. If you want to look at college graduates, like 39% of women have a college education versus only maybe 30% of men. So if you're already thinking like, okay, well, maybe 1% of the population is eligible for military service, and we're looking at officers with college degrees, and we're already going to narrow it down even further by saying that we're excluding women because we can't bother to appeal them for basic things. I guess there's other opinions I have too, maybe my own, but next to military service, having children is the biggest thing you can do for your country. And I'm not saying that everybody's job is to have children. Everybody has whatever they need. However, having children is the biggest contribution you can make to your country. Because if we stop having children, then there's going to be a huge issue, as we've already actually started seeing in a lot of like different aspects with looking at our aging population and how so many of like historically, usually it's been children of veterans who are joining the military. And so if we aren't if encouraging a healthy family dynamic, then how are we going to attract people who find that a priority now?
And I think we've also noticed that with, I want to say it was either China or Japan. It's a Asian country, but they would only allow one kid, and then everyone wanted males. So as the males are growing up, there's no females to reproduce with. And so I know that's been an issue as well. Not saying that we're going down that road, but we have seen something with other countries in that aspect.
Well, and I really struggle with I like the fact that men very frequently end up with jobs that are physically demanding and completely straining or even life-threatening more frequently than women. I think women could fill those positions more frequently, even with just basic small level adjustments. I was talking to a maintainer once. So when you're on crew in the capsule, you get to meet people and get to know everything about them, right? And so one of the people I talked to in her previous life at Priory, she was an aircraft maintainer. And it was really interesting talking to her because I was like, what was it like being a woman as a maintainer? Because I know that's one of the hardest jobs as far as like physically and just culturally. And she was saying how difficult it was because the cases that they had to carry around were so large. And so it was really complicated. Like there were some women who would just straight up refuse to carry them. And So then a lot of the men didn't like those women. And it was just kind of an interesting dynamic when I was looking at this and thinking, why do these have to be so heavy? Like, why can't we have something set up that makes it so everybody can universally easily move these cases around? Like, why does it have to be this complicated? And why do we have to sit there and say, this is technically a two-man carry, but I'm going to be macho and try to do it? Like, what if we want to look at the men who have back issues and are still trying to be a maintainer? Basically, this gets around to the fact where when you try to incorporate women, you actually end up coming up with things that benefit everybody. Exactly with how our caregiver leave got extended across the board for both genders. That was phenomenal. Like, I remember when I went through OTS and one of the cadre was like, you'll never see paternal leave increased. That's never going to happen. And like within 4 years,
Yeah.
like 4 or 5 years. That just like yeah. Anyway, it baffles me. But the basic thing is when you really think about it, incorporating women or any other minority group does improve the lives for everybody. You just have to be really open and think about it because it causes you to problem solve things on a different level as far as questioning, well, why do we do this way? Is this actually necessary? The very act of trying to incorporate diversity creates improvement.
Yeah, I agree with that because you're getting different perspectives too, right?
Mhm,
Like sometimes people get pigeonholed into thinking that a certain way is the only way to do it. But then someone's like, well, why are you doing it that way? Like you said, why are they so heavy? Why can't, is there a way we can make these lighter? Is there a way that we can do this without sacrificing the mission?
mhm. Exactly. Like, Air Force works in money, right? So, VA claims for back issues or whatever. I don't know. And of course, I'm generalizing on a career that I actually have very little familiarity with. But I do still sit there and wonder, like, there has to be something. There has to be a way to address this that we're not realizing.
Yeah, I agree. Were you able to figure out that solution for that individual?
I speculated with her, and she still was like very hardline, like, no, no. I'm like, okay, there's obviously things I'm missing.
So, how have the challenges of military service, create that unique benefits for your family?
So, like the benefit I mentioned previously, which is that my husband is so nicely integrated into my children's lives. They have a very good relationship. They're very connected with him. And it's either or if they need help with anything, right? They'll come to either me or him. There's not really a preferred parent, except my daughter. She's obsessed with me. It's really hard when you're not the primary, when and your child doesn't love you as much as the one that's at work all day. I do think that has created a more robust family dynamic. I think I appreciate the challenges of people around me a bit more as far as like what they struggle with in trying to balance everything. I like to give benefit of the doubt to people, which is really hard to do, especially in our career field. Everyone always has rumors of how, like, whoever else is gaming the system. And I just hate that thought. I think everybody is doing the best they can with what they got. But granted, then when you talk to leaders and they tell you about every other guy who's doing a terrible job and refusing to work. But I don't know.
With you being like the primary person going to work and being in the military, has that created challenges for you and your family?
It does in that I do feel really guilty when I go TDY and leave my husband with the children. I think the basic nature of being a woman, like whatever you try to do with your kids, the girls always do end up with more caregiver play and practice, right? And so I did babysitting in high school. I understand some basic child developmental milestones. And so when my children are dealing with whatever, my husband might have an expectation on how something should go, and I'll be like, no, he's 4. Like, this is what you're going to expect from a 4-year-old. Trying to get that basic understanding with him is it can be kind of hard sometimes. I also, it's hard to know how much of it is, when you're not the one who has to stay home with the kids, it can be easy to judge. And actually, he benefits quite a bit from the fact that I give him benefit of the doubt because I know people who are stay-at-home moms. That could have been a real possibility for me, right? And so when you see people complain about how like not feeling appreciated in their particular role, I think swapping with like my husband being the stay-at-home parent and me working I think we have a lot more grace for each other in understanding how we're both trying to contribute the most we can in what we're doing, as opposed to feeling that resentment for, I have to be home all day, I have to cook dinner, or anything like that. It's just a lot easier to balance between the two of us. Honestly, like doing this dynamic, it's essential to have a partner you can work with. Like life's been the hardest is when we haven't been like in sync with each other.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I was actually talking to someone yesterday about essentially childcare in the military and whatnot. And I would say yours is obviously the most unique right now, right? There's not a
Yeah.
lot of stay-at-home dads. How did that decision to come to be? Like, was he willing? Did he resent you at first? Because I know that's it's almost like an ego thing with like some people.
Yeah. So when he had a really good job when we were in Oregon before I joined, and overnight I made more money than him once I joined the Air Force. And so that of course was suddenly a real thing. He had to think about like what the heck? How do I find value here? I think this is something we're always still working with because he is a dreamer at heart too. He wants to have his business, and it's always hard to do that too. It's something that we had to work with from the beginning, even before the kids were involved. Just him understanding his purpose in life. Should he go to college? Ultimately decided that wasn't for him. And it can be really hard. I think he is most at ease with it right now, as we've always been. It comes around to another huge benefit we've had from the Air Force. For how hard things are, there are so many resources. We would go to the MFLAC. That was essential for us as far as strengthening our relationship and getting us back to where we needed to be together. And I don't think we would have ever had access or like done anything like that on the civilian side because I would have seen it as just too expensive.
Do you guys ever think that both of you guys should have, like, could have worked in the workplace and then just have the kids in childcare?
He wants to homeschool.
Oh, I give him kudos for that. I wouldn't have the patience.
The reason I'm laughing is it is talk about hard mode.
Yeah, again, I know I wouldn't have the patience for it, so I give him kudos for that.
When we first got together, he said very specifically he never wanted to be a stay-at-home parent, and we went from that to, no, I want to homeschool our children. I was like, wow, we leaned in really hard on the complete opposite spectrum. And I actually that's probably another benefit of military. There's a lot of people around me who've had a homeschooling experience, and I've actually been talking to a lot of people. You'd be surprised how many people around you do homeschooling until you ask. And makes me feel more reassured to know that and understand what resources to go for. I think if we found one of those community groups where everyone kind of like takes turns homeschooling, Josh would actually be a huge asset because he'd be able to do the STEM portion really well. Of course, you always have the deal where not enough men in education. Like little boys and girls, they need guy figures to look up to as well as women, right?
What advice, like, because again, your situation is very unique. For a woman who is in the military and she wants to have a family, what is some advice for, like, if her husband wasn't willing to be the stay-at-home parent, and then advice for how to make that work for him being the stay-at-home parent?
So very much wanted to, very much. I think there's a lot of apprehension with schools in general, with a lot of like what kids are dealing with in schools today. And so if someone doesn't want to be the stay-at-home parent, then it's not going to work. They shouldn't have to be. But there were actually periods of time too where even though Josh was a stay-at-home parent, we actually did pay to have Emmett in childcare because I wanted to give Josh that break, but also, time to work towards his business that he's wanted to do. And so even if someone is a stay-at-home parent, I don't think they really, if you can help it, I don't think they should be home with the kids all the time. The kids need something outside parents, someone other than their parents teaching them life skills. They need that variety. How any person would look into that would be something they'd have to figure out in their own situation. So that's something I've always strived for is try to find that variety.
Like, for childcare, did you use the CDC or did you use like off base?
In Cheyenne, we lucked out. We found someone who had a childcare at their house. We actually liked them
Nice.
quite a lot. Yeah, we thought she did a really great job. I know that that's really precarious. I don't feel as like we'll be as lucky to do that in this area, so I'm looking into the CDC. We're actually on the wait list, and we're gonna put our kids in there, at least so they can make friends. Kind of gets
Yeah.
back around to the friend issue.
I will say, like, I was a stay-at-home mom for the first few years of my first 2,
Yeah.
and it was hard to try to get my oldest into groups to interact with, and when we're PCSing and then having to reestablish that, and I think my biggest thing, my twins were a surprise, and then
No.
when I went to 2 to 4, I was like, for my mental health, I need to go back into the
Yes.
workplace.
Yes.
And that's why we went into the CDC and I went back to work because I knew for myself. So, anyone who is listening who is a stay at home parent,
Yeah.
if you get to that point, it is okay to get back into the workplace for your mental health. I just remember I
Yes.
straight up started crying. Like, I just like, I
Mhm.
can't do 4 kids. Like, this is so much. I have no help.
Yeah,
And when you have 4 kids, 4
absolutely.
and under, I mean, Lord.
If
And
someone thrives as a stay-at-home parent, absolutely they should do that, what works best for them. However, I also don't think people value enough how much continued employment, how important that is. Because even if have a job and it's just enough to pay for childcare, that there is a value into having something on your resume.
yeah, and I will say that was essentially kind of what happened with me. Like, I
Yeah.
did not get a paycheck. My paycheck went to straight to the CDC. And, that was something that we had to talk about was, okay, like, is it worth it? Because obviously being a stay-at-home parent, you don't have those childcare bills. But then when my kids were in the CDC, I was like, yes, it is worth it. I need that mental break to one, be around adults, but two, so my kids could also have that social interaction. And for, like you mentioned, giving Josh a break by putting your kids in for a day or two.
Mhm. It's so helpful. And then also, like, added benefit of since they're not home as much, then when they are home, they actually play with their toys because they're not stuck with them the whole day, which, probably any parent already feels bereaved about how little they're playing with their Christmas toys
Yeah.
already on January 1st. And yeah, just like I do see it as a balance, I feel like, because Josh wants so strongly for us to do homeschooling and everything. But I want whatever interactions and time we spend with each other to be better value. And sometimes the better value means spending less time together. And that can be a really hard thing to try to grapple with, right?
And it kind of just goes back to, again, taking a look at everything and weighing the pros and cons and seeing, like, is this going to work? What's the downfall? What's the upside? And actually, like, truly looking at it from like a
Mhm.
whole perspective instead of being like mindset on a particular way.
Yeah. Well, and so like since we're talking about childcare, the from my experience in the Women's Initiative team, struggle that parents have in my career field is if you're a single parent, then you are expected to go out to the field and you need someone to take care of your child for 7 days straight.
Yeah, I was talking to someone yesterday about like the childcare thing. That was one of the things was, okay, what about mid shift? Like, what if you are a single parent and, the CDC is open from 6:30 to 5:30, but yet you're working from 9 to 5 in the morning or whatever. Like, what do people do at that point? And so I know that's only like a mid shift. I didn't even think about like, what if you're gone for a week
Hmm.
and
Well,
not
and
every,
then usually you're like FCC providers, but if you have a baby like 6 months old, who in their right mind is going to take a kid every other week for a week straight, a 6 month old that they have to wake up through the night with? Like, there's no FCC provider who's going to take that. Um, it's a temporary problem because eventually it should be resolved, but I could see leadership's frustration in trying to deal with this issue.
they should honestly probably just make the CDC 24/7.
Can you imagine?
With
Sick
24/7
hours all the
ups, yeah, I know,
time.
all the time. I mean, they charge me enough for it. Uh, but yeah, it
I
is
can't
something that
imagine
I
with 4 children. Though you probably only have two of them in CDC right now.
after school care though. So it's still, yeah, like during the summer though, I have all 4, which is a lovely penny.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, luckily when they do go to school, like pre-K and kindergarten, it drops down a little bit, but
Mhm.
it's still a nice little pretty penny.
That is the nice thing about how we have things right now, especially if you do homeschool. You can do your vacations whenever you want. You don't have to worry about timing everything with everybody's work schedules and school schedules. Like summer break isn't a thing.
Yeah. I know for my kids' school, like in May, they have every Friday off. And I'm like, well, that's annoying.
Yeah,
Or
how are you supposed to do that?
and then the off days for school and the off days for the CDC don't match up.
Yeah,
So the CDC will be closed, but then my kids have to go to school and like vice versa. And
yeah. And how
it's a
old's the
struggle.
oldest again?
He just turned 6. So it's just like I feel like this is a
Gosh.
constant thing that, if I was dual mill, like luckily I have that option to be able to do it, but I just couldn't imagine like single parents or
Yeah.
dual to dual mill and it's not a Monday through Friday 9 to 5.
Yeah. Man, those parents. I mean, having children alone, like, makes you sit there and go, "How do single parents do it?" But then I also don't know how single military parents do it. What was really frustrating with some of the cases was, I think sometimes leadership would try to push the whole, like, "Well, you should have a deployment plan" issue. No, trying to deploy for 6 months and saying that your toddler was going to stay with your mother and asking your mother to uproot her life and live with you for 3 years while you do all the crew work, those are completely different issues.
Yeah, and I think that needs to be addressed because some parents can't uproot like that. Like my mom
Uh-huh.
still works and that's not it's just not an option for any of our parents. So it's
Yeah.
like, then what?
And the single parent thing is more frequent than you'd think because if you have mill to mill, which we have a lot of mill to mill in our career field, then you might have one parent deployed. And so then if one parent is pulling crew and gone for a week at a time, then like what do you do while you're deployed?
Mhm.
Or
Exactly.
while your spouse is deployed? I saw a couple I saw at least one person get caught up in that.
Yeah, my husband deployed this well, I guess it's 2025 now, but in
Mhm.
2024 for 6 months, and I'm a full-time student, so I would have to go to Tennessee for, like, a week or 2 at a time, and then trying to coordinate someone to come watch the kids so I could pursue, like, my schooling while my husband's deployed, it was a nightmare.
Did you at least get FCC or not FCC, but you get deployment childcare funds, right?
Yes, so that
Okay.
was a hidden gemstone that I found out
Mhm.
halfway through. Yeah, I know, right? Like the things that they don't tell you.
Yeah,
Yeah, so for anyone who is listening, if your spouse is deployed, you get 16 hours per month from an FCC provider.
per child.
Per child, yes. So mine was about 4 hours every Saturday. So it is something to utilize and it is definitely something to use a break if you do have a spouse that is deployed. Also, the Airman Family and Readiness Center, if your CDC does provide this, it's called Give Parents a Break. But if your spouse is deployed, they will give you a voucher to pay for that. And it's once a month.
Same funding is also available if you move before and after a PCS. You get maybe the same 16 hours. I don't know.
I think it is.
Yeah.
So if you are unaware of these benefits, because I wasn't aware right away, please definitely look into that if you do have a spouse that does deploy.
And this actually comes around to another point I frequently make on why we need more women in the military. We have so many resources, like just like an abundance of resources. It is stupid helpful. How how hard I've had it, it has also been so incredibly easy with the benefits I've had access to, as far as longer caregiver leave, counseling for my family. Just I could list forever and ever, right? I wouldn't know about a lot of these without talking to other moms around me. And there are a lot of these resources that it's really hard to get information out. There is Military One Source and other websites and stuff, but I was actually just at SOS, and we identified that a lot of people in our class didn't even know what Military One Source was. And so, like, it's just so hard to get this information out. The more women you have, the more people you have that have similar circumstances to you, the more likely you are to get resources to the people who need them because they can share it with each other. If you're the only woman in your unit, you have to fight so hard to figure out any of this. And when I in my unit, I was the only woman. Like, there was one other mom. I was the only woman. Actually, fun tangent. There was a point I was a minority in my unit for being straight because like at least half of the other women in my squadron were all gay. And I just looked at this and I thought, interesting world I live in. The fact that I am a minority for being a woman, but also a minority for being married to a civilian. Like, how many people get that? And for being straight. So I had nobody else in my unit to like actually connect with that I felt like was 100% like me. It's okay. It makes you a better person to connect with people who aren't like you, right? But as far as accessing resources, trying to figure out how to get maternity uniforms or just anything that fit me, or argue the importance of women's specific uniforms to leadership. If there aren't that many women or even women who care about having equipment that fits them and argue that to leadership, then they're not going to take it seriously. And so it's a hard point when you're a woman and you're a minority, and even among the other women, you are experiencing very unique circumstances.
And that's why, like, trying to connect with other women or just trying to ask those questions will at least try to help guide you when you are in situations like that.
It'll help guide you. The more women that we have in the military, the more women who will be able to serve in the military is what I argue. It keeping even a handful of women means it's easier and easier. It should be exponentially helpful over time to
We just
get
got to
more and
keep
more
fighting.
women. Just gotta keep fighting. It's hard. Man, it's so hard.
It is, especially when they you hear the negative comments or you're overcoming all these obstacles. It can be hard to fight, but as again talking to that person yesterday, she informed me that prior to 1975, that women couldn't have children while
Mhm,
serving in the military, and I didn't know that. So your options were to either get kicked out or have an abortion.
mhm,
And but there was a woman who fought that, and she was able to continue serving while having a kid during military service.
yeah,
So that whole point is keep fighting, keep asking questions,
yeah.
because sometimes something says something, like a regulation or an email or something may say one thing, but that's not, there's ways around it. There's a waiver for everything anyway.
And then another thing, like whenever you're trying to build up the courage to ask for these kinds of things, just like tell yourself, don't give them the benefit of not having to say no to your face. Don't give them the benefit of avoiding that discomfort. Make them say no to your face. Because if it's uncomfortable for you, it sure as hell is uncomfortable for them.
And it's easier to get a no through a keyboard ninja or someone behind a computer than it is face to face.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I've had to do difficult conversations with leadership before, just like trying to explain, like, look, this is the issues that moms are facing in our career, or just women in general, as far as like uniform access was another one. Just for some reason, every time I'm pregnant, I know it's only been twice, but there's a maternity uniform shortage.
Yeah, I know that's been an issue for a lot of women.
Like, why the heck does that happen? And then as soon as I'm done, the flood of uniforms comes back in on the exchange.
Funny how that works.
So funny. Yeah. And so, yeah, trying to make sure other women around me have access to those uniforms, like I've always found important.
So, Emily, how can people find you if they wanted to ask more questions about how to navigate that military family balance?
So, if you want to reach out to my government email, you can. I am the only Emily Foreman, so there is no number attached to my name at us.af.mil. Then, of course, there's Facebook. I don't know how easy it is to find me on Facebook. If you put in Emily Foreman, I might show up. I don't know. But you can also email me. My email is emilyforeman@gmail.com. So
Well, I will definitely put that in the show notes as well. I think your expertise, especially like, again, you have such a unique perspective. Again, being in the military and a civilian spouse that stays at home with the kids. So I know you could be a wealth of knowledge for anyone navigating through those waters. What is one thing that you hope people listening will take away from this?
reach out to people around you asking for help. Don't try to do anything by yourself. And also, take care of yourself first because you are important. You can't take care of your kids if you're in a bad mood.